So I love the Bible. The Bible has been around with me since I was really born. I was born into a church nursery almost, and have grown up with church all around me. And as soon as I began to read, I started reading the Bible. A lot of the more dense theology in Paul's letters were hard for me to read, but I found myself really enjoying Genesis and Kings, and those books were completely just fun to read as a kid, and I loved to read them. So as I grew up, I began to become kind of a bit of a Bible snob, really. I treated the Bible as something that you use to prove other people wrong, and I became really gifted at finding verses that would support my position. And as I grew up, this became more and more prevalent, and consequently, I didn't have as many friends as most people did because I was constantly using the Bible as a weapon to point out that they were wrong, or would silently judge them and have this kind of snobbish way of looking at it. And as I have gotten into college and had several things happen to me in college that would take way too long to explain, I learned how wrong that was. I learned that you can love the Bible with every inch of your life and still treat it poorly. And so this video is really a way to teach people, hopefully, to treat the Bible better, to treat other people better, how to handle believing the Bible and believing that what you believe is right and not beat someone over the top of the head with it. And like I said, this is coming from personal experience. This is what I would say to younger Noah 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. This is what I would tell him today. And I still see people in comment sections on social media today that all were me 10 years ago, that did things that I did 10 years ago. So this, I know, is prevalent, and this is what I hope is, as a video, will help you guys learn a little bit more of how to be kind and considerate of other people when you're using the Bible, and how to be a little more open when you're reading through the Bible. The first thing that happened with me was I realized that if you take just the Bible alone in this universe as truth and nothing else, you will be flawed intellectually. And the best example I can give of this is actually a concept most people don't think about. But you have to learn how to read before you learn how to read the Bible, right? If you don't know how to read, then you don't know how to read your Bible. And so if the only truth in the universe lies in the Bible, well, how did you learn how to read, right? You had to find truth somehow through the learning of a language, and you learning that truth of what a language is before you ever learn how to read the Bible. So you're not just resting all of truth on the Bible. You're resting truth on the Bible and the fact that you know how to read. And there are many other ways that we rest truth on. We rest truth on what science tells us sometimes. We rest truth on what our parents tell us. We rest truth on what a book might tell us, right? And as a human, we go throughout this entire life learning how to decide what is true and what is false based off of what is told to us, right? And a lot of the people that I've found are the hardest to deal with this topic is people that believe that just the Bible is reliable and nothing else on this planet is reliable. We don't trust science. We don't trust books. We don't trust information. The only thing you can trust, absolutely bar none, is the Bible. And these people really you can't talk to them. You can't have conversations with them because nothing that you say to them will ever be considered truthful. They will only consider what is from the Bible as true. And unfortunately, what that means is that they're unteachable. The only way that they're teachable is if they go and read their Bible in their own private life, or they have someone that they already agree with what he's saying from the pulpit teach them, right? And that makes them a person that really has really hard times having social interactions with people, has a hard time becoming someone that's good and only ends up becoming friends with people that already agree with that person, right? And that's not what you want to be. You want to be someone that's a little bit more open. You want to be open to multiple ways of receiving truth, not just through the Bible, but through other things. And I'm not saying the Bible is not important and it's not foundational and it's not something that brings you this wonderful way of seeing the world that is true. I'm not saying that it's not those things. But what I am saying is that you can't just rely on the Bible as your only source of truth. Even as a child never relies on the Bible as its only source of truth. It relies on its parents. It relies on, you get the idea, right? You get the idea of what I'm saying there. So that's point number one. Bible is not your only source of truth. It is a source of truth, but not your only source of truth. The second point that I want to bring home is that when you are using the Bible to bring home a truth, the best way to do that is not in an antagonistic, attacking kind of way. This is really difficult for me as a very blunt person in general. As when I was younger, I oftentimes would just point to a verse and say, "You're wrong, I'm right," end of story, right? There are better ways to communicate that without having to be so blunt about it and without having to take on such a dogmatic stance. And some of the best teachers of the Bible are people that can actually find out where the other person is at in their journey, see where they're interpreting and see how they're understanding truth, and then learn from what you think about things and dialogue together. And sometimes you're not going to win. There is in this sense a general sense of you may feel like you're right and you may feel like the other person's wrong. And I'm not saying that that's not going to happen. But the way you go about that, the way that you engage in that conversation helps tremendously to your side of the equation, right? If you go in guns a-blazing saying you're wrong and I'm right, you're probably not going to change someone's mind. Just being honest. Very few people are willing to listen to you if you have this arrogant position to all of your beliefs. However, if you go in questioning, if you go in contemplative, if you go in viewing the situation from, hey, we're both trying to get at truth here. Let's try and work at this from different perspectives. If I can look into what you're doing and seeing how you interpret this, and if I can see how I'm interpreting this, and if you're always willing to listen, then you'll hit a lot closer to the truth, I feel like, and you'll be a way more educated Bible reader and discusser than if you didn't. Another thing that I find a lot in the Proverbs especially is this concept of being willing to accept a rebuke sometimes, being willing to be proved wrong. A lot of people go into conversations about the Bible, and because it's the Bible, they think it's their only source of truth, and so they can't be wrong about it. And so they have established this belief that the Bible is right and I am right because I believe the Bible, right? And they oftentimes forget that they are interpreting the Bible a lot of the times, and their interpretations of the Bible can be wrong for various different reasons. You could be interpreting the Bible wrong because you don't know a Greek word or a Hebrew word, and no one ever taught you that. You could be interpreting the Bible wrong because a pastor told you something you thought was true, and you learned later that your pastor didn't have his sources right. You could be interpreting the Bible wrong because you find new evidence archaeologically that helps you understand the Bible better than you did before. These are all ways that we have actually learned that we were wrong in the past and have grown now. And so a lot of that needs to happen in each individual person. We need to be okay with accepting the fact that we're all flawed human beings that are not just going to read the Bible, understand it, and be right the rest of our lives. We are going to mess up when we read the Bible. We are going to engage with texts we don't understand. We're going to ask questions to people that may have answers that are wrong, may have answers that are right. And we are constantly evolving and changing and learning how we're wrong about what we're reading, right? And that's healthy to be in that space. That's not a bad place to be in, is to be in a place where you can freely admit, yeah, I don't really understand what Jesus is saying in this passage. Or, yeah, I don't really understand what was going on in this Old Testament passage. And that can help you a lot, actually. That can help you take off some of that feeling of, oh, I always have to be right all the time. I always have to be sure all the time, right? And if you can get to a place where when you're engaging in the Bible and you're engaging in your beliefs, where you're less comfortable with knowing every answer and instead more comfortable with the uncertainty that's there, I guarantee you will have way better conversations with other people about what is true and what is false about this whole thing. Because now your life's not dependent on it. It's part of learning to be confident in your own beliefs apart from Scripture even. Be confident in your relationship with God. Be confident in the belief even that Jesus rose from the dead. Those things are your core beliefs, but everything around it, all of those doctrines and all of those things that divide us a lot of the time, those are open for debate, and it's okay to not be sure about those things, right? And that, I think, will help you a lot in having these conversations, being more caring of other people. The last one I want to talk about is proof texting. I see proof texting so much today on YouTube, on social media. It's kind of the way that people communicate that they know a lot of Bible, is how long of a string of verses I can put together to create my argument. And sometimes they do a really good job of this, that I am oftentimes impressed by the dedication that some people have to communicating their argument through multiple different proof text verses, where they just daisy chain them one after another, and you're kind of left in this place where, wow, all these verses are saying this thing, you must be right? But here's the thing. As we've grown more to learn about the Bible, the more proof texting seems like the wrong way to read the Bible. And here's why I say that. The Bible was written by individual authors in a context 2,000 years ago. If you take one verse out of whatever was written 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, and apply it to a context today, whatever it may be, you are assuming quite a lot there. You're assuming that, one, this verse applies to this situation. Two, you're assuming this author in this passage meant exactly this thing that I'm applying. And three, you're assuming that if I put all these verses together, they're all trying to say the same thing, right? Do you see how many assumptions that is? That all of the verses that you're pulling together are all trying to say the same thing? That's pretty huge. And that's something that takes a conversation for every single verse to talk about, right? So if you give me a list of 10 proof text verses, I then, in response, if I disagree with how you're using all 10 of those verses, I can't have one conversation with you. I have to have 10, because you chose 10 different verses to formulate your point. So I have to have 10 different responses for why I might not agree with how you're interpreting those verses. You see what I'm saying? So that one is just not courteous, right? It's not courteous to do that to someone else, to give them 10 different things that they have to respond to that are so long, especially if it's not a situation that demands that they spend that long doing that. And two, it's way harder on the person responding to do that than it is for you to just find 10 verses that seem to say what you think they're saying and post them all up in this big long proof text. So all of those things I'm saying are ways that you should be considerate of the other person. Maybe find one or two verses that you think are the strongest to support that argument and talk about those as opposed to finding like 10, right? And then on those two, then you can have a healthy discussion about those two and work with those, right? And that's how I've found has been able to really have those talks and communication. But the other thing I'll say is, even with those two, be careful that you're not just pulling those straight out of a context of whatever the huge passage is. If you're pulling like a couple passages that seem to be talking about unity in the church and you're making it into a salvation issue, then, well, we need to have a conversation about how you read this chapter before we have a conversation about how you read this verse, right? And so a lot of proof texting really fails because it's not reading chapters and not understanding the broader context of what's going on. So if you're someone that does this, maybe go back and read chapters as a whole. Read what Paul's trying to say in a broader context, as opposed to just looking for like one or two verses to really drive home whatever you're trying to say. And stop reading the Bible as something that has these short little quippy one-liners that prove my point, and start reading the Bible as a letter in the context of Paul's stuff, as a story in the context of the Gospels. Read them as they were intended to be read, right? All in one sitting, as opposed to just one verse. The only place I'll say there's an exception to this is the book of Proverbs. And the only place in Proverbs that's the exception is chapter 10 onward. There you will find these quippy little one-liners that you actually can use as proof text. But I think that's the only place you're supposed to do that in, and not everywhere else, okay? So hopefully those are some ways that'll help you be a better Bible student, be someone that's not as aggressive, be someone that can have better conversations with people and not be hypercritical. And because the ultimate job as a Christian is to be loving, to be kind. And there are many passages in the New Testament that are filled with exhortations to be kind and gracious and gentle when reprimanding people, when using scripture. And I think that all of those ideas need to be considered whenever we come at someone from a social media space, in person, whatever it may be. I think that if you learn how to use the Bible better, we'll have better conversations and we'll be far more educated overall. Because otherwise we're going to just keep dividing ourselves, right? If you use the Bible as a sword too often, what you're going to do is you're going to keep dividing, right? And remember, a huge point of Paul is not division, but unity. And he writes a lot of the things he writes, not to divide churches, but to unify them. And going around calling heresy on people just because they don't believe the way you think about free will and determinism or any of those kinds of things is just not right to do. It's destroying the church, not building it up. And we need to be better about that. So hopefully this video helps. It might be one of the more controversial ones I give out here, but I do think that it's important to think about. So thanks so much. Feel free to leave a comment, hit that bell, and hopefully you'll get more content like this. Thanks so much.